I'm also an entrepreneur, so I don't think things just happen. I think crazy entrepreneurs start things that happen. So you can trace anything that moved in the world that wasn't weather to crazy people who got it started, including the crazy people who came to Texas and started it, and the cowboys and like all of that. So I just don't think we have enough crazy people locking arms and instigating and saying we have to build it.
Hey, welcome to another episode of McKinney Momentum. I'm so glad you tuned in. My name is Luke Gajari. I am the marketing manager here at the McKinney Economic Development Corporation. And this show is for you to help discover all the things going on in McKinney when it comes to the economic development landscape, different projects, different leaders, different industries that you can be more aware of as far as what's going on. And I'm glad you're tuning in. If you would, go ahead and give us a follow or a like or a comment on whatever podcast platform you're on, whether you're listening or watching on YouTube. Would love to have you stay connected. Today is going to be a good episode. We've got some new people that you may or may not be aware of, and it's going to be a cool opportunity to meet them, especially if you're at all interested or involved in the tech ecosystem here in McKinney and beyond. Greg Head is our guest today. He has been in the software tech startup space for over 30 years, actually built and sold a few companies a while ago, and now his focus is on reinvesting in the startup ecosystem. He was in Silicon Valley and then Arizona, and now is based in the DFW area. And he's a tremendous resource to our startup community here in McKinney and beyond. He provides a lot of resources through his company Scaling Point. He has an awesome podcast called the Practical Founders Podcast. And on the interview today, we also introduce you to Mike Wilkes, our new project manager at the McKinney EDC. Him and our vice president, Michael Talley, actually interviewed Greg to talk about the startup ecosystem in North Texas, what we can do to make things stronger and better in this area, and how McKinney can stay on the leading edge of startup tech space. And so it's a really good interview. There's a lot of dynamic conversations, things that I, as I'm sitting in the background just listening to the conversation, was super interested in them digging into some of these topics and gained a lot of insight just in the climate as a whole. And so would love for you to check this out. Let's dive in and get ready for Michael Talley, Mike Wilkes, and Greg Head.
Yeah, let's go ahead and jump right in. Greg, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Well, hi, Mike and Michael. It's glad to be here. My name's Greg Head. I am a longtime software entrepreneur exec who has come back to Dallas. I lived here in the early 90s where I met my wife, and we went on entrepreneurial journeys together. I dragged her out of Texas and Silicon Valley and then Phoenix. And so now I'm back in Texas. So I'm a software entrepreneur, investor. I've grown three companies to 100 million revenues in my previous careers. And now I help software and SaaS founders all over the world.
Okay. And how do you do that? Because I know we've talked about offline a little bit, but
I'm an advisor and a therapist and a mentor. So I'm a community instigator.
a therapist.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
So the crazy software founders appear everywhere: McKinney, Dallas, Tel Aviv, London, whatever, and they're all going through a journey that you don't learn about in university, and you can't read a book. When you get in the firefight, it's pretty difficult. And I specialize in the early stage, startup and early stage and growth stage software companies, the software as a service companies there. So I advise them on their growth strategies and how do I stay alive, and is this really the market? Is this really the thing, that old product market fit game? Growing their business, selling their companies. One of the founders in Palm Springs that I advised called me this morning about getting offers to buy his company. Is this a good offer? And the whole game. It's a game and a puzzle, and it's endlessly fascinating. And I help the crazy people who are solving problems in the world with software.
Okay, so talking about your different clients, and you kind of mentioned all across the world you work with.
Yeah.
With some of your clients and across Europe, Asia.
Yeah.
Talk about worldwide what that startup tech scene is looking like with the venture capital side as well, and then bring it back to the U.S.
Well, I'm a little bit older, so in the 90s there wasn't much software software business outside the United States. It was kind of a Silicon Valley and a U.S. thing. But in the last 10 years and last 5 years especially, now it's a global thing. If you have a computer and can code, you have access to all the ways to do it. And so there's people starting software companies all over the world. The U.S., and in particular, big centers like Silicon Valley in Northern California and Seattle, New York, and little Austin here in Texas, they're leaning more towards venture capital funding to get these started and growing. But everywhere in the world, there's software companies growing. And most software companies, by the number of companies, including here in Dallas, don't have any outside funding. They're self-funded by entrepreneurs building it out of their service business, or coders coding in their spare time and getting a business started. So funding isn't the only way to start a software business. And it's not bad or wrong. It's just a very exclusive game for with pretty bad odds, generally speaking, for founders. So you throw the funding rocket fuel at an early stage startup, the odds are they're not going to become the big billion-dollar company that we all hear about. The odds go down the more funding you raise, literally, to succeed.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I know you talk about the bootstrapping.
Yeah.
And I know how we've kind of worked on an innovation fund about being a little more open-minded when it comes to not penalizing a company for raising outside or not raising outside capital,
Correct.
I should say.
Yeah.
And you really, I think,
I advocate
up on that.
Yes.
About bootstrapping the company. That's that's how you control it. You make more money on the back end, or the potential when you sell.
Well, I'd say there's different sports and there's different ways to do it. So here in Dallas, I curate a list of all the Dallas software companies, just one of my crazy public service instigation to help the community here. And that's Gregslist.com/Dallas. And there's 895 real active software companies in Dallas right now. 55% of those companies have no outside funding whatsoever. They're all software companies based here. So they make a software as a product. They don't do software development or something like that as a service. So, and in Austin, the number is just 45% that are self-funded. So it's not like they're all self-funded or all funded by VCs in Austin and not funded by VCs here in Dallas. It's just a little bit of a variation. So overall, outside Silicon Valley, about 20% of software companies are funded by venture capital or private equity investors at some point, and not necessarily from the beginning. So in the last 5 years, I've been doing this since the early 90s. I was here in literally 1990 to 93 before their little software company got bought and head out to Silicon Valley. But the cost of making software and going to market has come way down in the last 5 years, and especially the last 10 years. Almost 10 times cheaper to, quote, make software than it used to be. So you don't need funding to build software and start selling it as much. And venture capital funding, all that big funding announcement stuff we hear about, companies raising tens of millions of dollars and so forth, the venture capital funds are way bigger. So they have to write big checks. And the companies have to be $1 billion companies for everybody to succeed. And if you don't become $1 billion company and you raised a bunch of money, then you're a failure. And that's no fun. So I generally recommend most founders, it always depends, stay off the big funding drugs as long as possible, and if not forever. And so I just, on my Practical Founders podcast, I just interviewed 46 founders in the first year. And the average value that the founders created of equity wealth, not investors, for investors, was $40 million. So that's like $1.5 billion for founders and their teams instead of going to investors. So the odds go up and you get to win the prize and you get to have more control. So that's generally a better way.
Gotcha.
For most founders.
Yeah. So you mentioned some of the different areas you've been in Silicon Valley, which of course has a great reputation for being a place for software companies to get VC funds.
Oh, sure.
And so bringing it back to DFW, what's your opinion of the startup culture in DFW? And then maybe some additional questions, but we'll start there. What do you think? How we're doing?
Well, first of all, Silicon Valley, Northern California, where Facebook and Google and Uber and everybody else is, that's a magical place. It's the Hollywood, of the software game. And there's big money, big funding, and a pretty crazy game. Everybody is in software or tech there. It's an exception to find somebody who works for a normal company in Silicon Valley, in any restaurant, at any get-together or whatever. And outside of that, it's a completely different world. There's every metropolitan area has a different culture and a different way. Austin's different than Dallas, is different than Kansas City, and the rest. So Dallas, because I'm kind of a student of the ecosystems, looking at all the companies, talking to everybody here in town, and helping out a lot of founders, and showing up to help locally. Dallas is more of a big company town than a startup town. Just in what people are and what's working and what the roots are. If you go to Austin, you've got to be kind of cool and you're kind of revolutionary, and that's where that happens, generally speaking. Less about big companies. You come to Dallas, there's 25 Fortune 500 companies in Dallas and Fort Worth, and big companies and big churches and big law firms and big private equity funds. So it's very big here, and there's a lot going on, tons of people. So the startup culture has to fight the DNA of the Dallas Metroplex culture, which is generally big companies, and the corporate kind of world, which is a little bit like defensive and we don't want your revolution kind of thing. The revolutionaries start in Austin and, keep going from there here in Texas. So Dallas and Houston are similar, that they're kind of big company focused, and there's like literally 900 software companies here, and they're not all big. So there's plenty going on here. You just can't see them. And the startup crazies have to kind of fight against the big company. You're the only one on your block here who's, hasn't made money in a year because you're doing a startup. Like that would be everybody in Silicon Valley, and it's almost nobody here relative. So we kind of have to fight that. So you look around, and the startup ecosystem isn't one of the big things here, as it is in Austin, for example, or Boston.
Yeah, so that's very interesting. Let's stay on that. So what are some of the things that Silicon Valley or even Austin has done well? What are they doing well that is adding to this ecosystem, this effective ecosystem? Because a lot of people like to talk about building an ecosystem.
Yeah.
But what are some of the things that, really put your money where your mouth is, kind of things that they're doing well?
Yeah. Well, if you look at Austin, for example, the early 30 years ago when I was visiting Austin, there was Dell over in the corner, and there really wasn't a tech town at all. Neither was Salt Lake City and Seattle at some point and the rest. So everybody's grown up. If there's a thriving tech ecosystem, it happened because of things that happened in the universe that didn't happen so much here. Dallas is one of the largest metro areas in the world that doesn't have as much ecosystem, meaning community, people who've done it before, like me, helping the next generation just to be helpful. Dozens of angel groups instead of just one. Lots of funding, lots of experienced people. So lots of events, lots of connection things. So those things grow organically. They just don't, and people create them, but they grow organically. And Austin, I'd say it's a lot of the community showing up to help the next generation.
Interesting.
And Dallas has a low multiplier quotient relative to Austin or Salt Lake City or Boston.
Interesting.
It's hard to pull somebody who's been successful in tech here and say, can you spend a morning with this new entrepreneur? And Silicon Valley is all that all the time. Every restaurant is filled with people in this hive kind of mentality.
Yeah.
And not so much here in Dallas.
Do you think part of that is because we're so spread out here in Dallas-Fort Worth, or what do you think?
I've heard that from people. That is one of the things. So there's the North Dallas side, the Dallas side, and the Fort Worth side, and lots of parts in between. But Silicon Valley is spread out too. So there's the North Bay and Silicon and San Francisco and Oakland side and the rest. They're way more connected. So I think it's more of a cultural thing. And I'm also an entrepreneur. So I don't think things just happen. I think crazy entrepreneurs start things that happen. So you can trace anything that moved in the world that wasn't weather to crazy people who got it started, including the crazy people who came to Texas and started it, and the cowboys and like all of that. So I just don't think we have enough crazy people locking arms and instigating and saying we have to build it. And I don't think it's the corporate guys saying we need to do it. I think it's creating hives like we have here in McKinney for, it's kind of a crazy thing. We're going to get the startup folks here and we're going to get them connected and we're going to keep them together. It's a different sport completely than the corporate world or running a dentist office. It's a crazy bet and we're the crazy ones.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So with the corporations, leveraging what we have in the region of DFW, we do have a lot of corporations.
Right.
What additional value could that bring to startups?
Well, if you look at Gregslist and all the software companies here, most of the companies are people who left corporate America. They saw a problem in big data or supply chain or logistics or something inside a big company and left to start their own company on their savings and their salary, sold right into the same company or something like that. So most of the companies in Dallas are serving big businesses, and that's not surprising. A lot of AI companies, big data companies, and the rest. So companies could do a lot to buy from the crazy new startups and buy from the innovators. Silicon Valley has a lot of that. The big companies based in Silicon Valley have kind of crazy CTOs that have bake-offs to look at crazy new technology from these funky new startups, and they evaluate it and they help them along. And selling to AT&T as a 3-person team here in Dallas, it's not as likely. But most software goes to companies. It's sold to companies. So most of this crazy software goes to 90% of all the software companies in Dallas and everywhere else on Gregslist are B2B companies selling to businesses. So if businesses wanted to buy more from the crazy local guys, which is a kind of a stretch. They're crazy and they're local and, we're big and, all of that. That would be helpful.
Okay.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the trend that like Coca-Cola released did a press release that their ventures arm for sustainability is just opened a couple weeks ago. And we're seeing a lot of Raytheon Ventures and these big corporations opening a ventures arm. Do you think that's an indicator of acceptance of, okay, it is high risk, but it could be high reward? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, a ventures arm is like saying, we'll help support you. Like McKinney says, we'll give you a little funding and come in here. So it's a little bit of a venture builder. And those things are partly like, well, these things are moving fast. We want a little piece of that. And sometimes it's in the space where they know they have problems and they want those to grow up and succeed. So maybe that's like building a farm team that can graduate to help serve them in the future because they're way too early. It's just very different, discussions from big companies to small companies. So as an older guy who'd been doing this before it was all cool in software, startups weren't cool, funding wasn't cool, innovation wasn't cool, and all the rest of this. It's just amazing to see all over the world how governments, municipalities, big companies, funding of all types are kind of embracing the startup mentality. And it's still a little difficult because it's a brutal sport and it usually doesn't work. So it's not normal behavior to go create a software company and
Definitely.
grow it up into something.
Definitely.
Talking about the practical founder, can you describe, really what you mean by that?
Yeah. So I talk to a lot of founders and investors and a lot of people in the game who help them, like the McKinney EDC here. And there's different swim lanes, if you will, for somebody who says, I want to start a software company. And there's kind of a myth that I have an idea and then I get funding and then I'm big. So most ideas don't get funded and most funded ideas don't get big. So it's kind of, there's two things there. And so about 25% of all software companies raise big funding from venture capital, private equity. And others that are just kind of startup experiments that kind of come and go. You've seen some of those pass through. It's a startup is an experiment. But there is a large piece of the market of software companies, just as many software companies who are growing valuable software companies without big outside funding. Sometimes no outside funding, sometimes just a little bit. And they're growing to 1 or 5 or 10 or 20 million in revenues just on creating software and selling it and growing from there. I call those practical founders. So I'm practical about it. And I generally try to keep most founders in that swim lane off the big funding drugs. I should get funding, right? Now, let me tell you what the,
Bring it back down to earth.
Yeah, bring it back down to earth. It's actually a better deal for founders to grow a company and not waste time funding when somebody won't fund them. And the odds go down once you've got on the funding drugs.
And that's a balancing act, isn't it? I mean, because I think we talked, through the Innovation Fund, we talked through with some of these applicants, and I feel like it's kind of like the work-life balance that we talk about.
Yeah.
The funding, building balance of your business. Some people are like, I feel like 50-50, some are 90-10.
The time they spend on raising funding and running their business, right? Yeah.
So what do you, as far as advice you give some of those companies, is it case by case?
Oh, it's case by case. But there's a few things that could say, generally speaking, unless you know the venture capital funding game, unless you've read all the what do we say, the like a prescription drug, unless you've read all the
SOP, that kind of thing.
Don't take the drug.
Yeah, unless you really understand the sport, and you and your business and your opportunity fit that model, and you're willing to make an all or nothing bet. Either it's going to go big or it probably won't, and then I'm zeroed. It's an all or nothing bet. Unless you really understand that, then you shouldn't play that game. So it's a bit like saying to somebody who says, well, I'm a good student and I want a career. Should I take a $2 million student loan and try to get into Harvard? Well, that might pay off for some people. It generally doesn't.
That's a good analogy.
That's kind of what it is. Literally, the 1% of 1% of all funded software companies are the big public ones we see. So if you say, gosh, it's worth the bet. I'm going to raise $10 million and give it a shot. And I either going to go big or go home. And that's the sport over there. Most founders don't want to do that.
Well, but I see what you're saying when you say you're a therapist.
Yeah.
Because you kind of bring them back and go, okay, let's go through this checklist of things before you take that next step in that direction. Otherwise, you need to take a step the other direction.
Yeah. Some of it's logic and some of it isn't. I mean, the entrepreneurial early stage game is I want to do this. I want to be rich. I want to make something. I want to solve this problem in the world. Like, it's not logical what I'm doing with all this ecosystem stuff. Like all the logical Dallas people wonder what this crazy startup guy is doing in town, putting on events and running around helping everybody. But there's a lot of therapy involved.
So early stage founder, let's just take an example or a case study, I should say. And what are some practical tips you can give someone that first comes into your office and says, hey, I need some guidance here? Yeah.
The good news, the bad news here about the startup game is it probably won't work, but there's a chance. It's way harder than you thought. It's not like a day job. You go to work and clock in and clock out and the rest. It's a different thing. The good news is anybody can do it if you find somebody, and more like them, that have a real problem, pain and the rest. There's a lot of problems in the world. And finding somebody with a real problem that will pay you to solve it and software that solves that pain is the first thing. So it's not about funding game or looking like you're a startup. It's about finding people who are frustrating and saying, this sucks, and finding and sorting through all of that to find something that will solve their problem. If you can't do that, then funding doesn't usually help in that phase, ironically. But that's the first thing is a lot of people kind of play act the startup game. They see what it is. Part of the problem is the only ones we see are the big successes. or the ones with their
Right.
names on the building. So we don't see all the non-successes and we don't see the little guys. Like, the other 90% we don't see. So people are a little bit naive about it. But if you stick with the problem, you start selling something and you can get it going. The second thing is be very practical about the funding. And you should be using your own money, your own time, create a business to grow a software business out of it, raising money from friends and family. It's different. That's a different kind of commitment than when you raise $10 million from a venture capitalist. Mm-hmm. If you don't succeed in their milestones, you're out, thing's dead, right? But if your mom gives you $100,000, right, you got all the time in the world. You're good. So most people really don't know how to sort that out, and that's another thing. But it's really hard puzzle to create a business out of the dirt that wasn't there before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've mentioned some of the kind of additional pressures that a venture capital will put on you. Could you explain a little bit more about that?
Well, if you're raising money from a fund, meaning these are professional investors, it's not the next door neighbor dentist that's got a little money, or your mom, or these are professionals, and I give them money to invest, and they invest with me, and I know these people, and I played that sport. I did the venture capital funded growth game twice. Company I helped start went public.
Congratulations!
And that's why I can do anything I want now. And another one, we raised money and it didn't go, so they got stuck. And the equity for all those options and exciting stuff kind of washed for all but a few employees. Sorry, what was your question, Mike?
Just some of the additional kind of pressures that a venture capital firm.
So if you're raising money from professional investors, and you should be aware that they have a different kind of stock than you do and the employees. You have preferred stock. When you raise $5 million, $10 million, they have liquidation rights. If your company doesn't grow fast and needs to be sold for a fire sale, they'll get almost all of it. For example, liquidation preferences. All of a sudden, it's like your in-laws are living with you, which not every entrepreneur wants to have. And they're saying, I don't think you should do that. I think you should do this. And then I don't know if we'll let you do that. You should hire this guy, but not hire this guy. There's different degrees of involvement that investors have, but they should have involvement. They just gave you a pile of money and they want to help you. And they're generally pretty wise. But if you don't meet the milestones, now they're on your board. They can fire you, right? So, or if you want to sell it for 20, this happens a lot. We created a $3 million software company. Somebody wants to buy it for $20 million. But I raised $5 million before, and that wouldn't be a big payout to those investors. So they say, no, you need to keep going. So those aren't bad things. It's just you should understand that's what the game is, and you're both trying to go big together. And it's a little bit like having, playing in the NFL. Yeah, you love the sport, but you're going to get injured. They're going to put you back on the field. You're going to get traded. There's all kinds of things that could happen, and that's just the pro game. So I just think the biggest opportunity right now, and it's expanding fast, because software is 10 times easier to create than it was 5 years ago, and AI is going to multiply that. And it's just easier to stay off big funding if you don't have to. And it means that the average $3 to $5 million software company sells for multiples of revenue, like $20 million. Had a conversation on the phone over here with an entrepreneur that I advise. He's getting offers, and he's got $1 million software company, and it's growing. So he's wondering, this is already like talking about tens of millions of dollars of value to the founders, not to the investors, and he can make any decision he wants. So there's life-changing wealth with exits under 50 million, which almost no VC will want. That's just not big enough for them to win two.
Yeah.
They have to cut in and they have to go big. So go big or go home is that game. And you can play that, but that's most founders, I would ask, somebody gave you $30 million for your idea or your little scrappy, product business right now, would you take it? And if they say yes, I'd say, well, then don't raise money from venture capitalists, because you have to sell the business for hundreds of $1 million for them to get the same result, and you to get a piece of it.
I want to go back to the ecosystem real quick. So, we're obviously trying to do our part here in McKinney with the Innovation Fund.
Thank you. Awesome.
Trying to get more involved with.
That's what ecosystem is, people. People doing their part and showing up and helping the next generation.
Yeah.
Right.
But we still think we're at the very early stages of that, obviously.
Right.
And, getting involved with Venture Dallas, with Dallas Startup Week. Just got back from Collision up in Toronto.
Oh, great.
But, I want to put you as the head of ecosystem development for DFW for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
And anything goes, you're in charge of it. What are your next 3 steps? What can not just McKinney be doing, but all of the communities be looking at, maybe from the economic development side, maybe from the city side, chamber, you name it?
Yeah. I think ecosystems happen organically, but there's a general structure that shows up. There's funding, there's service providers, there's the been there, done that guys that angel invest and offer a lot of therapy to the new ones. It's a crazy sport. Let me explain how this works. Stay in there, kid. It's okay. There's people who join those little crazy startup adventures. There's places. There's all kinds of things. The food groups of ecosystem that you see in Salt Lake City or Austin or Boston or Tel Aviv or wherever. So I think Dallas needs its own form of Dallas-style capital factory. Austin has an ecosystem, and there's a lot of thriving, and there's the capital factory is kind of in the middle of that, putting on events and education and connecting up investors and bringing in big companies and, being the glue that does all of that. And they're not as active up here. I know Brian and Josh and everybody, but we need our own form of that connects these. And I think that's what's missing right there. There's a lot of pockets. Everybody hangs out with some groups of people, but they haven't kind of collectively come together to look at it and say, man, there's a huge crowd, right? And somebody help sorting out through that. So let's say the connective tissue between NTAN, the angel group here for North Texas Angels, for Tech Angels, and other groups that are happening. Part of the reason for Gregslist is to show there's 900 actual software companies here. Right. And you can't see them otherwise, right? And if you had a big event, Startup Week doesn't really do it, doesn't get everybody together. In big cities in Salt Lake, everybody comes together. 25,000 people in a city, a third the size of Dallas-Fort Worth Metro, Salt Lake City. 25,000 tech fanatics come out every year for their big Tech Connect conference. There's more glue and more DNA to do that. So we need more people. I'm doing a little piece of the glue, and Jeff at NTAN's doing another piece of it. But I think you guys are doing part of it. So somebody in the middle who could pull it together and really do it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people here in Dallas. It's not like a long history of crazy startups. So it's not like every street corner has a whole bunch of these. So nobody's stepped forward. Mark Cuban didn't step forward and say, I'm going to be the leader of Dallas and we're going to get everybody together. He could pull it together or something like that. But he's got other things there too. But like if you made a big enough surge, Mark Cuban would show up and be on stage like he was at Venture Dallas and other things like that. So I think we're kind of got little pockets that are showing up, and it hasn't really congealed into something larger that you see in the bigger ecosystems.
Interesting. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's do the rapid fire. Mike and I will trade off questions. Michael, start off.
All right. So what is, in our rapid fire questioning, the best meal you've ever ate?
Well, I ate meals on the run for 30 years in my entrepreneurial career and don't pay attention to it. But my wife and I love Cooper's Barbecue. We go over here to Fort Worth, but we love the original in Llano, just north of Austin.
You can't go wrong with that.
Yeah, it's great.
Okay, first job.
Well, I did, there was snow shoveling and in lawn mowing back as a kid. I never did it work, but my first job after college, when I was looking for a real job and not finding it back in the late 80s, was a buddy of mine said, hey, work with me at this software retail store. That's how I got into software. The software retail store, this was when software was in a box. and it was just for the geeks, and nobody had computers in those old days. It was called Egghead Software, and they sold half the software in the United States back then. But I was Greg Head from Egghead, so a college grad with a suit and tie and a name tag, Greg Head from
I
Egghead.
call it Greg Head Software.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Awesome. What time of the day are you most productive?
I'm an early guy, so I can't go into the night. So got up this morning at 5:30, and within 10 minutes, I'm working on stuff. So I'm one of those crazy people. It's often I'm racing in the morning.
Seems to be a trend
Yeah.
on the startup side. Okay, so stuck on a desert island. Take 3 movies with you.
Oh, my wife loves movies. She loves all the shoot 'em up movies and the superhero movies and everything. I'm endlessly fascinated by the hero's journey of crazy entrepreneurs that do crazy things and do really hard things and end up changing the world. Everything we see, Dallas and everything, is created by crazy people in the beginning. So I love the biographies and the movies. So I could watch The Founder. This is the Michael Keaton movie about McDonald's and Ray Kroc. I could watch that over and over and learn something every time. Muscle Shoals, another crazy person who started a genre of music and R&B from rural Alabama. It's just an awesome movie. And movies like My Cousin Vinny, I could watch over and over. It's just
Okay.
But I love the crazy founder movies.
Mm-hmm. Same question, but books. You can take 3 books to a desert island.
Well, these would be books I could read over and over. So the first book that really kind of turned me on to not just fiction was even though it's fiction, was Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. An old book, Robert Pirsig, kind of introduced me to the world of philosophy and the concepts underneath everything we see. I studied economics, and I'm a student of what's going on underneath that can be useful in the firefight. And that was a great book. I'm here in Texas, and I read books like Fehrenbach's Lone Star, The History of Texas, and I learned something about why we are like we are here in town. And if I was living someplace else, every time I read that, something I just experienced makes more sense. So those are 2 that I could reread.
Nice.
Maybe I'd read something about the desert island so I have some context there. So you can see I'm kind of coming in and figuring things out. I'm a figure.
Desert island for dummies.
Yes, right. Yeah, pretty much. Or I'd write it. How about
there
that?
you go.
Yeah. So I'd create the blog of Desert Island, the podcast of Desert Island hacking. I could do anything, and this is what I do for fun: is dig in with all these things. It's a great sport.
Okay.
Real life is much more dramatic and exciting than all these movies.
So let's go with bucket list travel destination.
Well, I love to travel and go different places, but we're thinking about Japan, which is not just another Europe. It's not just the Alaskan cruise that everybody does. So we're thinking about Japan. Grab my family for Christmas.
Okay, cool.
If you could spend an hour with anyone, living or dead, real, fictional, who would it be?
Well, let's see. I think Steve Jobs would be a good one, but probably Abraham Lincoln, right? He did. If there's another one, a crazy person who thought differently and changed the world and put on the trajectory. People, in the beginnings, move us to where we are. Dallas is the way it is because of the people of long ago. So let's say Abraham Lincoln.
Nice. Yeah.
Okay, and we'll wrap it up with, if you weren't doing what you're doing now, I know you've done a lot of stuff in between.
Yeah.
What would you be doing?
Well, I can't sit still. I can't play golf on Fridays like today. I'd probably be running a company still. Mm-hmm. So this is me slowing down and not carrying all the weight and all the risk and all the challenge. But I'd probably be running a software company.
Yeah.
I'd probably buy a little software company that was struggling and turn it around. That's one of the models. See, so people can get like Sam Knight here in Dallas. He and his buddy got a company to him $1 million in revenue, which is still like just pre-adolescence and getting going. And they sold it to ECI Solutions out here in Keller, and now it's going to be a global leader in software for the construction and contracting industry. So, people buy these little companies. So you can sell a company a lot younger than you used to be able to. That might be a thing I would do, is buy a little young company and help it grow.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's awesome.
Well, great. Well, we appreciate you joining us.
Yeah, thanks for everything you guys do to help the crazy entrepreneurs, here in North Texas.
That's where
really
the
appreciate it.
innovation comes from.
And we'll ask everyone to check out the Practical Founders podcast.
Absolutely.
Check out Gregslist. Greg's doing a lot of things. He can't do it all.
Yeah.
Neither can we, but we appreciate everything you do to
Yeah.
kind of
I'm on LinkedIn if anybody wants to connect and see what I'm chatting about. I have a pretty large conversation crowd over there that's going on.
Absolutely.
great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, sir. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank
having
you. I enjoyed it.
Awesome.
I hope you found that interview as insightful as I did. Again, I know they mentioned it, but would love for you to stay connected to what Greg is doing in this region. He's really serving and giving back to founders. And so if you're a founder, you know a founder, would love for you to share this episode with your circles and connect with Greg. The links will be in the notes of his website. And I have found his podcast to be an incredibly insightful look at the industry and things that are going on in this world. And it's very real time, it's very relevant, and it's very practical, as the title would suggest. So again, give us a follow, give us a like. Would love for you to share this podcast with a friend, and then dive into Greg and his resources if you found this episode helpful. Stay tuned for the next episode of McKinney Momentum.